The next person I want to introduce was the second speaker ever at the Silicon Valley iOS Developer Meetup, and he just showed up. And actually, he emailed me and said, hey, I've been doing a study on how people use the iPhone. And he came and he told us a lot of things in May of 2008 about how people were using the iPhone and how iPhone users were special and different from people using other kinds of phones. And we all know that now. We know that well. We know that iPhone developers are special and iPhone users are special. And so Michael Mace doesn't have to tell us that. What he's going to tell us is about some of the mistakes that we make or the people who tell us how to make our apps make. And sometimes those things defy our common sense. Well, if that's the case, we have someone here to help. And he's going to give you some great research-based descriptions of things that go wrong in apps and what to do about that. So Michael Mace.
Thanks very much. Hi. Thanks. So like most of the people here, I am working on a software startup. But like most of the people here, I also have a second job. And in my case, what I do is I do the mobile strategy at a company called UserTesting.com. And what I'm going to be sharing today is information that we've found at that company about the common areas where developers tend to get stuck or where apps tend to have usability problems. To frame that stuff, I should give you a tiny bit of background on the company. First of all, how many people have heard of UserTesting.com? Okay, fairly good. How many of you have actually used the service? Not many. Okay, so for kind of background for the people who haven't, just so you'll understand where this information is coming from. The way this system works is say that you've got an early version of your application. You want to get test feedback from real users on it. Or say within your design team, you're having an argument about a particular UI widget, like, oh, no, it should be like this. And somebody else passionately says, no, it should be another way. This is a really easy way to get feedback on all of those sorts of things. So what you do is you come to our website, you fill out an online form saying, here's what I want tested, here are the questions that I want to ask the users, et cetera, and you also say, here's a URL where you can download the app. And we can deal, by the way, if it's a pre-release app, we can deal with the UDIDs and all that sort of stuff, so you don't have to worry about that. So you send us that information. We take it, we send it out to the testers who video record themselves using your application. So you get real video of them, not just using it, but talking about what they're doing, explaining, well, here's what I'm trying to accomplish, or I'm confused by this, et cetera, et cetera. You generally get the results back in less than 24 hours, sometimes in as little as an hour, depending on how things are going. So it's really quick response from normal users who haven't tried your application before. So I started at the company about 9 months ago, something like that. And the first thing I did was I went and got the archive of all of the mobile tests that the company had been done. And had been doing this for a couple of years. So we're talking literally thousands of tests. And I culled through them trying to see what are the trends? You know, where were companies getting stuck and what was going on? What could I learn from this that we could maybe share back with people? So what you're getting is kind of an analysis of that data. The other piece of background that I should give you is just a little bit of info on me so that you'll know how I filtered it. So started off as one of the early Macintosh developers back in the day. I ended up working at Apple for about 10 years during the bad days when Steve wasn't there, and managed to leave right before he came back, which had interesting stock price implications that I'm not going to go into today. Kicked around the valley, did some consulting. That's what the logos are about. I also worked at Palm and PalmSource for about 6 years. So I've actually started working on mobile before we even had smartphones. So what you're going to hear today is stuff that I've seen at user testing, but filtered through my own experience, having been in the industry for a while. What do I think this means, and what do I think it means for developers? So you're always supposed to, when you do one of these presentations, you're supposed to say what you're going to say and then repeat it again at the end. So in that spirit, here's what I'm going to talk about. First of all, new computing paradigms usually cripple the current software leaders. And paradigms are new platforms. So smartphones are definitely a new platform. I would argue that tablets are a separate new platform because it's got different user behaviors and best practices around it. But anyway, it's very, very challenging for folks who have previously been in the software industry because you will have and I will have a set of reflexes that were tuned to other previous platforms that may lead you astray. And so you have to unlearn some of the stuff that you knew in the past. In particular, there are 4 places where companies are getting stuck, so I'm going to talk about those. Basically, doing mobile requires a different set of reflexes, and the thing about reflexes is you don't realize that you have them. So we have to talk about them explicitly in order to call out what we need to relearn. And then at the end, I'll give you 10 steps to try to avoid these traps. So I'm going to talk about why these transitions are dangerous, then I'll talk about the 4 traps themselves, and then about how to avoid them. So anybody know what this is? Shout it out. Lotus. Oh, this is an experienced audience. I've had some audiences that were actually stumped. You know, it's like, I'm not sure. Yeah, no, it's Lotus 123. The dominant killer application of the early personal computer days. I mean, if you weren't in the industry at that time, it's hard to explain how powerful Lotus was at one point in time. But if you take Google and Facebook and combine them together and maybe add a few app companies as well, that's kind of like the power that they had. Incredibly successful company. And yet, when we moved to the graphical interface, these guys didn't make the transition successfully. And it's not just an isolated phenomenon. If you look back at the history of things, all of the standards from the old command line driven world were not successful at making themselves the leaders in the new world. So word processing, it was WordPerfect. Spreadsheet, Lotus 123. Database, it was DBase. When we went ahead to Windows/Macintosh, I'm using Windows generically here. Notice there's no trademark, okay? So when we went ahead to that world, it was a different set of applications that ended up being dominant. And the interesting thing is this has happened over and over again in the history of the industry. So jump forward a few years. When we were starting to transition from the Windows and Macintosh, the graphical-centric view of the world, and the focus of innovation and software development moved to the internet, you had a set of companies that were very successful in that old world, and you look then, say, you know, pull forward to 2013, you look at the companies that are most successful in terms of traffic in the internet today, and it is an entirely different set of companies again, despite the fact that in '95, these companies that were the existing leaders all knew that that new stuff was coming. And they had by far the most engineers, they had the most money, the most resources, they had plenty of warning that this was coming along, and still they didn't manage to leverage their old dominance into an equal position of new dominance. Now, they weren't all wiped out, obviously. A lot of these companies are still around, except for Borland. But they definitely are not as powerful in the new world as they were in the past one. So now we're moving to mobile. And it's very, very early in the mobile space. It's hard to say who the exact leaders are going to be. Most of the real shakeout is still ahead of us. But if you look at gaming, which is the category where things are most developed, the shops that are developing the most successful mobile games are generally ones that had not been doing like PC games in the past. It's a turnover with a different set of companies and a different set of reflexes. So is mobile going to be a complete extinction event for the existing software companies? Hard to say, but it definitely is another one of these big paradigm shifts. So the interesting question to ask is, okay, well, why does this happen? You know, it sounds almost like a natural law. So what's going on? Three things happen at the same time when you shift platforms, and they end up together being very, very challenging to existing software folks. The first is when you go to a new platform, the users reconsider their software commitments. So think if you've got a Macintosh today and you're getting a new Macintosh, you're probably just going to transfer over all of your existing applications and just keep using those. But when you first went to a smartphone, when you first got that iPhone, chances are that you didn't go out and say, well, let me see how I can move Microsoft Outlook over to this thing, or let me see how I can move Word or something like that. Instead, you go to the App Store and you look around to see what sort of new apps you can use. So basically, you're like a prairie dog. Your head pops up and you look around and reconsider for the first time in a long, long time what you're doing. So that alone creates a big, big challenge to the existing software companies because they tend to assume that their installed base will protect them. We're successful today, we're going to be successful in the future. Second, the rules of good product design change. So what makes an app successful in the old platform often makes it unsuccessful in the new platform. And we're going to talk about that one a lot because that's critical for mobile. And the third thing is the leaders in the old generations of software generally underestimate the challenges until it's too late. At some point in time, they usually wake up. Like Lotus at one point in time finally realized that it was under a deadly threat with the graphical interface stuff. But at that point, there was so much momentum accumulated behind the competitors that it was too late for them to come back and do it. So add all those three things together, and it becomes very, very challenging for companies and for individuals who are trying to deal with these transitions. Now, if you want to flip it around, then, hey, a platform transition is a great way to try to kill off one of those big existing software companies. And we should all be targeting how to create extinction events for these guys, which is a fun conversation to have. So that's why transitions are either dangerous or interesting, depending on your perspective. Let's talk about the 4 traps that we see software companies getting started in. The first is mismanaging their existing legacy of stuff that they've done in the past. So by legacy, I mean business practices, I mean their existing code, I mean the stuff that they've done. One big mistake that we see is that people who have an existing app in the PC space or the Macintosh space, or that have an existing website, will think they can just port it across to mobile. Oh, it's easy. Here's our website, and we're going to just do some adaptive design, and we'll take out the Flash, and we're done, and it's going to be great. And inevitably, it's not that great when you go at it from that attitude. The usage flow in a lot of cases will be driven by the previous version that's been done on those other platforms. Here's how I expect users to come at my application on the PC. Therefore, here's how I'm going to expect them to come at this stuff on mobile. Inevitably, that ends up creating a bunch of problems. Either too many or too few features. And this is awful because there's no perfect answer to this. If you take an existing property, whether it's a computer application or a website, and you take it across to mobile, if you leave out a bunch of features because you're trying to simplify, because that's what you're supposed to do on mobile, a lot of your existing users will get really upset. Like, where's the frickin' feature? I want irregular word wrap or something like that only 5% of the users use, but inevitably it's the 5% who are the noisiest online. And so then you say, OK, let me put in all the features. And what happens is the application becomes so complex that a lot of people can't figure out how to use it. So you're hosed either way. There's a really careful balance that you have to fit. And in some cases, it's about which features do you make the most prominent versus which ones do you hide. But definitely, you have to be very careful about thinking about these things. And we see a lot of companies fall down in that situation. Or just broken features. People will move things across and not realize that stuff is not working when they get to the new mobile space. So I'll give you an example. This is a major website doing educational content online. So this is a company you will have heard of. They gave us permission to show this stuff like all the other examples I'm going to show you. So I took out the branding. Please don't try to guess. This is just a static screenshot from a part of their website when you're going to order some video content from them to do educational stuff. And they've got this really nice purchase process where it says, it's probably hard to read there, but it says monthly subscription, then it says monthly premium. And as you'd usually have for websites, there's a little tooltip that pops up when you hover over it that says monthly premium includes exercise files so you can follow along for the same files. So they've really clearly optimized the purchase process for these things. They know what questions people are going to have. What's more, if you get confused, there's a compare plans link also, which pops up a nice table in Flash, which gives you all the checkoff items for all the different plans. I mean, it's really, really, really nice purchase support that they've done in the architecture of this thing, which clearly they have worked on over the years and they have optimized to make people convert through to purchase and make this all work. So they decided they were going to do mobile stuff because after all, watching content on mobile, that makes a bunch of sense. And so they just converted this thing over to run it on a mobile device. And now what I'm going to show you is a video of what happened when they did that. OK, no Flash, no tooltips, nothing you can pop up. It's just kind of naked order this stuff.
And then annual premium, so I'm wondering what is premium?
Monthly premium. Now, what is monthly premium? I mean, $25 a month to start, because I don't know what premium is. I know like a lot of these ones have a premium thing. I don't know what premium even is. There's no information here. It's just like dink, dink, dink. What is what? Where's the information in this?
Yeah, OK. So you can see the logic by which they got to this, right? They were saying, OK, we're moving this across to mobile. We've got this purchase flow that works really, really well. All we need to do is remove the elements that don't work technically. But what they didn't realize was in the process of doing that, they were completely destroying the purchase process. And so I know you aren't all doing commerce sites, so it doesn't necessarily apply to you directly. But we see flow problems like this all the time in mobile apps where they've made these kind of compromises without realizing what it means. So what do you need to do about this? Well, the first thing is you want to really rethink your app very thoroughly as opposed to just porting it across. The best practice that we see in large organizations that are doing mobile development is they do entirely separate mobile teams. So for instance, this is the way that the Evernote guys do it. There is a team for working on Macintosh. There is a team for working on Windows. There is a team for iOS. There is a team for Android. They may even have separate tablet and iPhone teams by this point in time. I'm not sure. Now, when we talk about that to a lot of the companies that we talk to, they go, wow, that's a lot more than we can afford. So at a minimum, the thing that you need to do is have dedicated product management managers who just know mobile and can harass everybody else about the things that you need to do to be successful in the mobile space. Second thing is you want to separate what you do from the way that you do it. And that sounds a little cryptic, so the best thing I can do is give you an example. Look at Windows Phone. For many, 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 many years, Microsoft tried to figure out, how do I recreate Windows within a phone? So there was a start menu, and it was all very menu-driven, and they had all the Windows icons and all that other stuff. They didn't really start to get good momentum in mobile until they threw that all away, and they rethought the paradigm from scratch in order to do something that was appropriate for mobile. And actually, the design is really pretty nice. If you haven't ever played with the current Windows Phone stuff, it's really pretty good. The problem is it's way too late. I mean, Apple and Android had captured most of the market by the time they got there, and now they're working uphill against that, and that's just not likely to have a nice outcome. But what they should have done from the start is, rather than saying, we are the company that sticks Windows on a bunch of devices, they should have said, we are the company that helps people manage their information and to be productive. How can we do that completely rethought on a mobile device? That was the thinking that they failed to do at that time. Third, break down your application. What do people most need to do when they're going mobile? And maybe that is the key that helps you prioritize which features. Okay, the things that are most important for most of our users, let's put them prominently on the first screen. The things that are only going to be wanted by 5% of the users, let's bury them really deep. And you know, I recall that a lot of you do contract development, and I'm sure you've had these sorts of conversations with clients, right? Where they say, well, I need to have this and this and this and this and this and this in the application. You've got to engage with them in a dialogue about what are the most important things that they're going to use in mobile. What are the less important ones that the power users can find further screens down when they need to, and really help them think through that sort of flow. In a lot of cases, it's good to break things into multiple apps. Somebody was mentioning this earlier today. In mobile, in a lot of cases, a series of rifle shot applications seem to work out better than one big shotgun application that's trying to do everything. And then focus on the mainstream 80%. This is something that we used to say to people when I was working at Palm. I think it still applies today. If you design your application consciously for your noisiest, most powerful users, the ones who are always after you on Facebook, and who post the most reviews online, the problem is you're going to make the frickin' thing too complicated for your average user. What you want to do is figure out a way to mollify that top 20%, but design consciously for the middle 80% who are going to be doing most of the usage and are going to be buying most of the copies or paying you in other ways for most of the copies. And kind of find a way to satisfy the top 20%, but don't consciously design for them. It's a little bit different in games, where that top 20% may be the only ones who are paying you any revenue. So that's a different dynamic there. But for most applications, you want to focus on that mainstream 80. So that's legacy and how to deal with it. The second issue that we see companies getting stuck on is fear of mobile. So this comes across in several ways. One is we just find with mobile users more tendency to hesitate at doing things than we see in desktop computers, whether it's Macintosh or Windows. So things that they would naturally do around entering personal data into an application or doing a purchase or something like that, they will often be very hesitant to do on the mobile platform, even if they would normally do it on a PC without really caring about the security on the computer. Why is that? I think part of it is because the whole ecosystem on mobile is a lot more complex. You've got the handset company. In many cases, the OS is coming from a different company. You've got a carrier that you're dealing with. You've got a bunch of app developers. And we all know what happens when there's a technical problem is each of them will point at the others as being the one responsible. Well, that kind of wears on the users after a while. It makes them start to feel very, very uncomfortable. And it makes them hesitate because they feel like, well, this is really complex. I'm not sure who's there. Are they really, as a group, doing a good job of protecting me from hackers and stuff like that? So it's fear that it's going to get hacked somehow. Second, fear of accidentally opting in. So I promise you, I had already created this slide before I saw the speakers this morning, but it was really, really interesting to see. So starting last fall, the FTC started issuing statements about the sort of disclosure you have to do before somebody opts in. And actually they went out proactively to the press and they had little conversations kind of like the presentation that you saw this morning, which are designed to inform but also subtly intimidate, to warn you that you can't violate the same laws that apply to stuff happening on a computer that say you have to disclose information, you have to tell them when they're opting in, et cetera, that has to be done on mobile as well. And what we found is what a lot of developers do is, again, because they're trying to squeeze things onto that tiny screen, what they'll say is stuff like, well, the disclosure of stuff that they're opting in on, let's bury that 5 layers down because people don't need to see that. They're not really interested in it. So we'll just put it down under a button or something like that. Well, what happens is consumers start to complain about this stuff. They go to the FTC. The FTC doesn't do stuff like this where they're issuing stuff to the press or where they're coming around and talking to you at conferences unless they've gotten a freakishly large number of customer complaints coming to them. And basically, these sorts of warnings are the last thing that they do before they start suing people. So you really want to take it very, very seriously. The third thing is fear of automatic social posts. So the first two I kind of expected. I didn't realize how big the third one was going to be until I started seeing some of the test results that we saw. And what we find is people just get really, really nervous. And it's because of the stories that have been out in the press about things that occasionally happen with certain apps. So the path example, I presume you guys have heard about this one, but they didn't realize that if they sent text messages to people in Europe, that those text messages would automatically be converted into phone calls where the text message was read to the phone, and that those calls would be issued at 6 a.m. because that was the time they were sending the stuff to the network. So people were getting unsolicited phone calls basically from the Path application saying, hey, so-and-so wants you to log into Path immediately, and learn about this stuff. Big blown up story. And of course, the press loves to cover these things. So you only have to have a few incidents like this before everybody hears about it. And then what happens is nobody trusts any of us because they've heard these stories. So we're all suffering because of mistakes made by a small number of application vendors, but that's just the situation that we're in. So what we see in tests is stuff where people will just say, they're looking at and there'll be a like button within an application. They'll go, I'm not clicking that. There's no way, because I don't know what's going to happen. Who knows what that might post? Or as soon as this test is done, I'm going to go to my Facebook page and just check to see what this freaking thing said about what I'm doing. Or even if you're not careful about how you name things. So we saw an app that had something called social choices. And what that meant was things that other people have chosen in aggregate. So it's no personal information. It's just in aggregate things that are popular that other people have chosen. But when they saw the word social, they were afraid, oh, if I click on that, I may be posting something, and therefore they wouldn't click on it. So you got to be really careful with the wording that you use on things like that. One example of the weirdness that you can get into, this is a little screenshot from an application called Sit or Squat. It's by the guys who make Charmin bathroom tissue. And what it is, it's a mobile app that lets you rate different public restrooms that you've gone to. So you can take a picture of how tidy is it in there, and you can kind of thumbs up or thumbs down, and they're building a big national database of all this stuff. But within that application, they have a login, of course, for users, and you can log in with Facebook. So picture yourself, okay? Follow it through. I'm going to log in with Facebook, and you're thinking, is this going to, do a map of where I go to the bathroom? And we know Facebook users, right? For some of them, that'd be cool. I'm in, that's just fine. But for a lot of others, it's like, no, I really don't want to go to that. And they create that anxiety by just having this Facebook login without any explanation of what they're going to do when you log in. And so the lesson here is not don't use Facebook login because it's very convenient for a lot of people. But if you're doing it, just put a couple of lines of text that say, here's what we're going to do after you log in with Facebook, and here's what we won't do. And then most people will be fine. They'll go ahead and use it. So here's an example of one of the people who was trying to deal with some of this information, kind of how they reacted. This is one of those personal information storage apps where you enter in your driver's license and stuff like this. And here's what one of the users said when they were asked to put information into it.
It would be assuming that everything is held on a secure server, and that's the main thing that I'm concerned about. And I think that should be expressed clearly when you're using the app, is that this is kept on a secure server, it's encrypted, things of that sort.
Yep, so it's not I won't use your app. It's you've got to reassure me that you've done the right things before I'm going to be comfortable interacting with the app this way. And chances are, if you saw this same app on a personal computer, people wouldn't even think twice because they're just more used to the personal computer world. So what do you need to do about it? Well, one is, do you remember these things called trust marks? They were popular in the early days of the web. It's a little badge that you could put on your website that said, this place has been reviewed by such and such company to make sure it uses good security practices. We got rid of that stuff on the web because it became so ubiquitous that it was just kind of passé and we didn't need it. We need to bring that back for mobile applications. If you're asking for personal information, if you're doing some sort of transaction, having one of those trust marks, so actually going out to a company, having them do that audit, and then putting up that trust mark, can make a significant difference in people's willingness to deal with your application. Second, display the opt-ins. You know, if you are potentially going to have them opt in to email or social things or other stuff like that, you just need to tell them about that stuff explicitly. Third, give absolute clarity about what you're going to do related to social posts and what you won't do under which circumstances. So an example of doing notification right. So there's an app out there called AnyDo, which is kind of a to-do tracking application. And one of the earlier versions of it, they had this nice thing. Here's the Facebook sign, and it said right under it, your tasks will not be linked to your Facebook account in any way. That's perfect. Now, what frustrates me a little bit is in a later version of the application, they pulled that line out. It makes the whole thing look cleaner. You got less text. That's what the designers always tell you to do. But from my standpoint, that actually was a step backwards in terms of the way you're dealing with users. Next, let's talk about the third trap, which is creating confusion. And this one is a very, very rich topic. So there are all sorts of things that we see companies do wrong in mobile applications. One is just elements that are too small to read. You know, it just the text is too tiny and people simply can't cope with it. Or maybe the programmers are 25 years old and they've got really, really acute vision so they can see it. But then, you know, you get some older people who are doing it and maybe they can't focus quite as well. And by older, I mean over 35. And, you know, and so you'll see people doing this sort of thing when they're trying to deal with the applications. Another one is low contrast. Yeah, okay. So it's very, very trendy today in graphics to do gray text on a white background or dark gray text on a black background because it looks really cool in a dark room like this. And oh, by the way, when we do our design reviews very often, what we do is we'll go into a darkened room and we'll project it up on the wall, and then we'll look at the stuff up on the wall and we'll kind of judge the designs based on that. Then people go out and use this stuff in direct sunlight, and guess what? The contrast really fades out and the stuff becomes unreadable. You know, and you look at iOS 7 with the white text in the weather app under certain weather conditions, and that gives you a great example of what not to do. Unusable design elements. Sliders look really cool in applications. They're just so pretty. You know, it's just this colored bar. It's so simple looking. And it seems to make complete sense that you should just put that in there for doing numerical selections. And they work fine when you're doing about 5 or 6 numbers. You know, just like from 0 to 6 or something like that, a slider works pretty well. When you go beyond that, the trouble that we get into is that people forget about the ratio between the size of the slider and the size of the finger. And this is actually drawn to scale for what you'd have on a smartphone. So for instance, we saw an app that was a ticket purchasing app from one of the major ticket companies on mobile. And you know, so you go to, like, you're going to see a concert or something like that, and they have this whole range of tickets from cheap nosebleed seats way in the back of the stadium up to backstage pass, drink with the band for all night, you know, $25,000, that sort of stuff. So $20 at this end, $25,000 at this end. And then you tell somebody you want them to select a $75 ticket. And what you get is users trying to roll their finger 1 pixel at a time to try to adjust the slider, or maybe tapping repeatedly to try. They're getting 90, no, that's not it, no, 45, no, back and forth. It's just an ugly, ugly experience. There are different UI elements that let you select numbers in different ways. The thing is, they aren't as compact, and they look kind of ugly compared to those sliders. However, the advantage is they actually work. So you want to think through this stuff really carefully. Cryptic buttons and text. Oh yeah, all the time. Buttons with weird icons that people don't understand, or text that refers to things that make sense to you as a developer, but is not necessarily intuitive to anyone else on the planet. Slow response. So you tap on the application and something doesn't happen immediately. And this is another one that takes me back to Palm. So even then, 10 years ago, the rule was somebody taps a button, something happens instantly. Maybe you just invert the button, or maybe if necessary, like if there's network latency or something like that, do a bunch of spastic animation that has nothing, doesn't have to have anything to do with what the application's at. Yes, right, yeah. You want the application to look busy, because what happens is if the application looks busy, people don't sense the passage of time the same way. So you take a 3-second delay while you're going out to the network to fetch something. If the app looks busy, people will go, wow, that app is really efficient. It's really working hard. Whereas if it just stays there static, not only are they going to get impatient, but they're going to think the app is frozen. And what will they do then? start pushing a bunch more buttons, and who knows what's going to happen at that point in time. Lack of help. So this one's a little controversial. There are people out there who will tell you that no mobile application should have help built into it. That if you build help into your application, it is a sign that you failed as a designer because you've made your application too complicated. I want to tell you, as somebody who has watched a whole bunch of user tests, that you should never underestimate the ability of users to screw up in an application. I mean, no matter how intuitive you think it is, they will find a way to do it wrong or to misunderstand what you're trying to do. The only place where it's okay not to have help is in a game where figuring out how to use the thing is part of the game. Then it's okay, then it's a sense of mystery. But I'll tell you, a sense of mystery in a productivity application on mobile is not fun for the users. It's really not engaging, it's not attractive. So I'll give you some examples in a minute of very simple stuff you can do to give people help. But the bottom line is you've got to always have help available. It's kind of like tooltips are on the PC. On the PC, when you're confused about an interface, you move your mouse and you'll hover it over the element that you're wondering about, because chances are a tooltip will pop up and tell you what it does. No tooltips in mobile because there's no sense of hovering. So tooltips are the crutch for usability in the computer space. In the mobile space, the crutch for usability is a question mark icon that they can tap on that will give them help. That's the first thing the users look for when they get confused in mobile is where's that question mark icon? If it's there, they'll do just fine. If it's not there, other bad things will happen and they probably will just stop using your application. So, oh yeah, another one, favorite one. Unintuitive success path, that's the technical terms. In other words, they don't understand what they're supposed to do with your application. And again, it was clear to you because you've been working on it for 2 years, but it's not necessarily clear to them and they get really, really confused. A lot of this stuff comes back to a trade-off between beauty and productivity. I don't know, because I'm not on every design team in every app company in the country. But the impression that I get is in a lot of cases, companies will design the look of the application first and then try to figure out how to make it usable. And I think actually you want to flip that around, especially for smartphones, because the screen is so small and it's so easy to get confused. I think you need to design the functional usability first. How does it work, and make it as straightforward as possible, and then try to figure out how to make that look pretty. You may well end up with a little bit more text on the screen. You may end up with more icons than you wanted to have. But the worst thing that can happen to a mobile app is people get confused, they go away, and then they never come back again. And we see that happen a lot in these tests. So let me give you an example of some of the confusing terms and buttons. So this is a little clip from some of the tests that we've done.
Go to the next task. Create a gem to save this information.
OK, so create a gem. First of all, what's a gem?
I'm assuming that's create a gem, this plus sign.
See, it says add data, not
data.
gem.
Now, does that add the title of the gem or the data that I want saved?
I guess I'd have to go back to connections. Share. Oh, is that little symbol a share? Let me go back. Did I not understand this? Let's see. Is this a share? Looks like a refresh. Looks like a refresh symbol, not a share symbol.
OK, all right. So an interesting thing is going on there. That actually, that's a share button. But that symbol is a refresh symbol on Android, but this is an iOS application. So we're getting people who are getting crossed up between icon designs on different platforms when you have conflicting icon designs. So it can get really, really hairy really quickly. By the way, another thing I want to point out there, unlabeled icons. I know it's uglier to have labels under the icons, but it also helps people get stuff done with your application, so you really, really want to use those labels. So to give you an example of the conflicts that we see on icons, there are a couple of icons that are standard across all the major mobile platforms. So for instance, the little magnifying glass icon says search in just about every application, every platform. A question mark icon generally means help no matter what. But for a lot of other things like refresh and bookmarks and favorites and share and other stuff like that, it is very different designs. In the case of Android, they've even had multiple designs that they've changed between at a time. So for instance, more on Android used to be a circle with an arrow pointing down, which to my generation means eject your DVD, by the way. And so they changed it to a dot thing that's similar to the Apple one, except it's vertical dots instead of horizontal dots. I presume that's lawyers that helped them with that idea. But you even get cases where you have almost the same icon design on two platforms that mean different things. So the little stacked up pluses is most recent on iOS, and it's add to queue on Android. Or three outlines of three people together, that's most viewed on iOS, and that's social group on Android. So all sorts of really hairy confusion you can get into. Now, you can, of course, say, well, let me just use the icon set that's standard for the particular platform that I'm on. But you do get these cases where users are going back and forth and they get confused. What really makes it tough is there are a lot of people out there doing mobile apps, or pardon me, mobile websites, where one website runs on all the different platforms. And in a lot of those cases, they'll pick one person's icon set or another one, and then you get all sorts of cross-contamination. So basically, over time, what happens is these things just cancel each other out. Because there's not a single standard that's repeated all the time, people get confused, and the icons start to mean nothing at all. We see some of this happening with certain gestures and swipes as well that mean different things on different platforms. So it can get very, very tricky. And again, if you're heads down on iOS, you may not realize the mindset that many of your users are likely to be in or how confused they may be because you're just kind of soaking in a single platform. Unresponsive applications is another big issue. I alluded to that a little bit earlier. I want to show you an example of what happens when an app is not immediately responsive the way that you need it to be.
Okay, we want to import. Tap anywhere to import. Import photos. I'd like to access photos. Okay, fine. Let's import. So I'm assuming it's going to tell me when it's done, because I don't see any updates or anything of what it's doing. So.
Okay, what she doesn't realize is that she's just started to upload 400 photos from her device to a server up on the web. And it is one after another sending the photos up to that server. It should have done two things when this started. It should have said to her, hey, do you really want to upload 400 photos? And then second, once you chose to do that, it should have given some sort of status bar or something like that to explain what was going on. Instead, it didn't do either. So what she assumes is that the application is broken or frozen. And so she starts trying to tap all the different interface elements to try to find out what's going on. So let's go to that menu on the upper left. Let's look at the library. No, that's not it. Let me go back to the menu. Let me try, main. No, that's not it. OK, let me come back to my library. Let's look at that. No, that's not it. Let me try scrolling down. No, that's not it. Then back to the menu. Let's try favorites. No, it's not in favorites. OK, go back to the menu, back to my library. No, that's not working. Let's try down here. What does that thing do? No, that's not it. Let's try up on the right. No, that's not it. On the left, let's do this. Nope, that's not doing it either. Let me cancel out of it. I compressed this down. That sequence took about 2 minutes. In those 2 minutes, 34 button presses. So one for every 4 seconds. By the way, if you were trying to analyze the analytics, good luck figuring out what actually happened. That's why I like this. I think this testing paired with analytics can be very, very instructive about the sort of stuff that's going on. But anyway, you can see how this is all the fault of an application that simply didn't anticipate how the user was going to respond if it didn't immediately give them some response. And this is a problem that we see pretty frequently. So what do you need to do? Well, first of all, we need to change around the ethics of how we, not the ethics, because it's not like moral ethics like the last section. We need to change our thinking about what's good design. I believe, based on the tests that I've seen, that functionality in a mobile application is the highest form of beauty. And really making it very, very useful is the most important thing, and then figure out how to dress that up as nicely as you can, not the other way around. Second, you want to avoid confusing UI elements. When in doubt, use text, because people understand that really well. I know that can create problems with localization, so use text with some extra space to allow room for the localization to be put in there if you're in a character set that takes more space. Label your icons with text if you're not sure that people are going to know what those icons mean. It's not as pretty, but it will actually be more effective. Avoid multi-level menus. I wanted to be careful with the time, so I didn't put this one in here. But there's a whole separate thing that I could show you with somebody trying to use one of those 3-level menu systems, and they're trying to navigate down and navigate back up. It's really, really ugly. The menus can be appropriate, but be very, very careful about how you structure that stuff. Respond instantly. So, somebody taps, you've got to do some stuff immediately to show them that you've registered that tap. And then great help. And by great help, I mean preferably context sensitive. But even if it's not context sensitive, it should be searchable and it should be always available. Let me give you a couple of examples of help done right. This is WebMD. So I encourage you to go out, get the application, even if you don't want medical advice, just play with it a little bit. First thing they do on the left side when you install the app, it says, hey, do you want to take a quick tour of the app? If you say take the quick tour, all it is a series of static screens with the tooltips built into the screens. So these aren't tap and pop up or anything like that. They're just showing you, here's what this icon does, here's what this thing does, here's what happens when you do these things. And you just swipe through it. It's really, really simple. It's almost embarrassingly straightforward, but it's great instructions for users at the beginning, but also if they can come back to the tour later, then, oh, I'm confused right now. Let me jump back to the tour, flip through it. Oh, yeah, that's right. That's what that does. I can go back to work, and I don't quit out of the application. Another really nice example that I've seen that I think is really, really good is an application called Snapseed. This is a photo editing app, and it has your typical mobile cryptic interface. That on the left is what the application looks like. Unlabeled icons, not clear what you're supposed to do with a picture. This is kind of really a nightmare in terms of usability. But the saving grace is they have that question mark icon in the upper left-hand corner. You tap it, and what they do is they superimpose a layer. Really simple. They just gray out the background, and they superimpose a layer that says, do this, do that, here are all the controls. They've done that for every screen within the application. Very simple to program, very easy to maintain, and yet something that provides a tremendous amount of utility to the users. So to me, this is a great example of how you don't have to make your design look all cluttered up in order to provide very good help to people and let them be able to deal with it. So that was confusion. Now let me talk about the fourth trap, which is creating boredom in the hearts and minds of your users. So mobile, it's kind of like run a birthday party for 3-year-olds. We're very, very short attention span. They're always running around all over the place. You need to have stuff to keep them engaged because there's so many distractions. And if you don't keep them focused, they will run off to do something else, whether it's playing some other thing on the device or looking up stuff or checking Facebook or something like that. You got to reward the users. It doesn't mean everything has to be a game, but you got to make them feel like they're making progress almost immediately in order to keep them going. The top turnoffs, I don't know what the point is of this application. It's too hard to learn. I'm getting too many social prompts. So this is not what I was talking about before. This is when stuff pops up and says, hey, do you want to share that with your friends on Facebook? No, I don't. Stop asking me. Either too many or too few controls, and this is another one of those cases where you got to hit a very careful balance because the power users always want more controls, or people just kind of find the thing boring. And in these video tests, you can kind of see how the boredom is expressed. What I like about this one is you don't even if this thing weren't in English, you could tell what was going on. So let me show you what that's like. It's a bad sign when they sigh.
I am not sure. 9 lines. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So is that all those things? Well, anyway, let's spin and see what happens. I'm not sure exactly what I'm doing here.
Long pause again.
Okay, so that costs me $2.25.
Basically with that, I was just kind of bored. Just the same thing repetitively, and there didn't seem to be any change in it. The levels changed, but all that really did was make me lose my money a little faster.
Yeah, so now these are people who kind of, because they started doing the test for it, they feel obligated to complete. What would have happened with real users is they would have been out of there almost immediately when they didn't feel engaged. So this is an interesting one because what web app design would tell you to do is something that doesn't work well for mobile. In the world of web app design, you'll hear this over and over. You want to ship an embarrassingly bad version of your web app really, really early so you can start getting feedback and you can iterate on it. So figure out where are we losing people. We look at the analytics. Where are we losing people out of this thing? Let's make a guess at why. We'll build a fix. We can then make it a slightly less embarrassing version, and you go through it really, really, really fast. This is what all the VCs tell you to do. And what we've seen is a lot of people, a very large number of people saying you should do this exact same development cycle in mobile. But here's what happens when you do that in mobile. So you put out an embarrassingly primitive version. You get completely trashed in the App Store. You desperately try to fix it. At the same time, you built up a bunch of one-star reviews. Even after the time you get it fixed, everybody's against you. They don't want to look at it again. And as a result, eventually you decide, well, mobile isn't a good match for our business, and you move on to something else. And I see this happen over and over again. So what do you need to do? Well, the first thing is you want to not just be testing for usability. You want to be testing for emotional engagement with your application. How do people feel about it? Do they feel motivated to continue doing it? And again, it's not that everything has to be gamified. If it's a productivity app, make them feel productive really quickly. It's just some sort of reward, some sort of feeling of I'm accomplishing stuff that will keep them engaged and keep them going. And this is, again, a great place where mixing the analytics and this sort of stuff together can help you look at that very comprehensively. The second thing is, and I cannot emphasize this too much, test before you ship. The mantra in the web world is ship early, ship often. The mantra in the mobile world should be test early, test often, before you ship. It's not to say you have to use our product, okay? There are other ways to test this stuff, but please, 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 test before you get it out there, because it is so hard to undo things once you get a bad rep on the App Store. So let's talk a little bit about how to avoid the traps. I've got a video here from Evernote that's talking about the way they use our services. I'm not going to show it to you today because it just feels a little bit too much like a commercial. But one of the takeaways from it that I'd want you to hear is they say one of the things that this helps you with is learning how your users think. And I think that's really important. Again, even if it's not using our tools, if it's using somebody else's tools, the most important thing is if you understand how your users think and how they react to stuff, you can proactively make the right decisions for them so that you don't get into as much trouble. And it's very easy, especially if you're a small developer, you don't have a lot of money to be reaching out to do focus groups and stuff like that. It's very easy to think you understand your users but not really understand them. And so find some way to get real feedback from real users so that you can start to anticipate what's going to work best for them. So I promised you these 10 steps on how to avoid these traps. So first of all, rethink your stuff for mobile, not just how the application looks, but the workflow and stuff like that. Second, design for that mainstream 80%, unless you're doing a game that monetizes on the top 5%. That'll be a different presentation sometime in the future. When in doubt, use text instead of cryptic graphics. Avoid multi-level menus. Make it work first, and then figure out how to make it pretty. Respond instantly. Any sort of tap or action by the user, let them know what's going on and let them know that you heard them. Give really superb help that's accessible at all times. Show them that they're safe. Reassure them about, trust marks and things like that. Avoid creating social anxiety. Say what you're going to do with all that social information. And then test early, test often. So that's the stuff that I want you guys to remember. Here is contact information. So if you want to do a free test with our stuff, there's that code UserTesting that you can get to. There's a white paper version of this if you want to refer to it, or if you're trying to educate other people about this stuff like a client. You're welcome to download it. It's available there. Or if I went through any of this stuff too fast or you didn't get these URLs written down, just Mike, M-I-K-E, at usertesting.com. You can reach me there. I would be glad to talk with you, give you information, whatever you need. With that, I'll shut up, and hopefully we got time for a few questions. Thanks.
For questions. Let's take some time for questions. Okay. One more time on the hands. Okay.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much. Curious, have you seen any difference in the interaction with the new iPhone, which is slightly taller than the old iPhone 4 when it first came out because of the height? Can you comment on some of your observations?
That's a really good question. So have we seen any differences in interaction with the new iPhone with it being slightly higher in the test? I haven't seen any difference on that. Where we've seen difference and something that we've seen some developers testing has been the flattening of the graphical interface in iOS 7. And what I'm hearing back from developers is that can really polarize a user base, because you've got users who are very, very used to the way your application looked in the past. And when you change the way it looks, it creates a discontinuity in their minds. It makes them uncomfortable, like they're going to do the prairie dog thing of looking around and reconsidering. On the other hand, if it doesn't look new and modern, like the rest of iOS 7, a lot of people get really pissed. Like, well, why haven't you modernized this? There's obviously something wrong with your app. You're not maintaining it, other stuff like that. So we've seen some people testing different degrees of flattening in their applications to try to decide how much they should make it look like iOS 7, especially if they've got a successful existing application. That's a really hard decision to make. So that's the main impact that we've seen out of the new stuff. Yeah.
Has anyone asked you to put a dollar value to getting these things wrong? And if so, what was that dollar value?
Has anybody asked us what? Sorry, it's hard to hear you up on stage.
Put a dollar cost to getting these things wrong.
Oh, yeah, the dollar cost.
So what were the costs?
Yeah. So what are the dollar costs of getting these things wrong? Has anybody asked you about that? Nobody's ever asked me that one. They usually tend to view it as just a survival issue, like, am I going to be successful at all versus just completely ignored in the App Store? And so we haven't been asked to monetize, exactly what the differences are on these things. What I can also tell you is this is fundamentally qualitative research. This is like focus groups, what we're doing. These are basically little electronic one-on-one focus groups that we're running. And that stuff is always hard to quantify because it's not numerical results. It's not like analytics where you can go through and say this percentage of people have this. You want to use this more like just getting general information on how people think, looking for areas that you want to investigate more. It's not the sort of thing that you can easily quantify. So I don't want to oversell it. It's not like I can say this will save you, this will produce 20% uplift in your sales or something like that. Those figures don't exist, and I think it'd be really hard to measure that in most cases. But thanks for asking. It's a great question.
Oh, now you hold up your hands.
Have you done any user testing with accessibility?
Have we done any user testing with accessibility? Great question. Not any that I've seen. It's all a matter of what what our customers choose to test, and usually what they're doing. Actually, what they're usually doing is they've already finished development and then they do the testing at the end, which is not a good idea because it's usually too late to change things at that point in time. It's like, oh, I've got it done and it's perfect. Now I want to get feedback on it. No. Get feedback when it's not perfect. But no, I'm not aware of anybody who's tested accessibility. We could do it by identifying panelists who have accessibility challenges, but nobody's asked us for it in the past that I know of.
This is more of a comment, but I've used usertesting.com a lot, and I love it.
Cool.
And one of the things that I think it does a really good job exposing is like issues of like the gender blind spot. So if you're designing for something and maybe you have a male designer or a woman designer, you might not think about how even just a gender difference would change how people navigate or use your user interface, and I think it does a great job of exposing that. It also, if you're having to make the case for a design decision, it's great data to show to like a CEO or something to advocate for what you think is right, because often they'll listen to someone who might give them cash more than someone they're already paying to do work.
Isn't that frustrating? You're the expert. They've hired you as an expert, and yet they will listen to some random person who was chosen because they're a user, and it seems more credible. But that is the way it tends to work. The other thing I'll say on the checking gender stuff, have these tests done with people who are different from you, because you'll have a set of assumptions. One of the things the Evernote guy said in the video that I didn't show you was one of their apps, they did a heart icon for it. Like, Evernote, saving stuff that you care about, do a little heart. And a lot of the male users said, well, that's too girly. I'm not going to use something with a heart icon. And who knew, but that's the sort of stuff you can find out. So thank you. Yeah.
Yes. Have you seen large differences in responses if the app is tested with 1 or 2 people versus, say, 10 people?
Oh, great question. Okay, diminishing returns on doing larger numbers of tests. When you're doing a quantitative test, you want to have a statistically appropriate sample, so you test on a whole bunch of people. With this sort of testing, if you just test on 5 people, you will find that the rule of thumb is you'll probably find 80% of the problems with just testing on 5 people. So say you can afford to do 30 tests. It's better to do several rounds of 5 people each during the development process as opposed to doing 1 round of 30. Because most of those 30 will end up repeating each other. You want to do small samplings as you go along to get feedback as a part of the process. This fits really well with agile development. you know, you just do some tests and stick them in with the Agile process to validate things as you're going along, but just a small number of people. Thanks.
So I used user testing before, and it was a B2C product, but now I have a B2B product, and there's some setup required. Is there a way to use that with those kind of clients where I guess I would invite them?
Yeah, so you invite, in other words, you're inviting the testers rather than using our panel. Is that what you're asking about? Yeah, you can do that. You need to be one of our business customers, so we don't offer that on the, just basic pay-as-you-go thing, because it's more logistics for us. But yes, you can set up a thing. We call it private panel. So just contact us and say you want to do private panel testing. We can set up with you how we will provision the stuff out to the private panel testers. That's easier for us to do on the web side than it is on the mobile side today, because there's extra logistics for mobile. We're in the process of fixing that. So if you want to talk afterwards, I'm going to stick around for the rest of the conference. So if you want to discuss it some more, I'd actually, yeah, that's another thing. If anybody has feedback, I would love to hear from you guys, like suggestions or problems or things that you want or anything. Please grab me during one of the breaks or something.
Okay, let's thank Michael. Thank you very much. Thank you.